For my idea colored lenses, as part of the project, it's a brain thing, I decided to experiment with glass painting. My idea for this was to paint onto the glass window the colors of my tinted lenses. Starting with my first pair I received in 2017 that were purple to my most recent pair that I'll be getting in the next couple of weeks that are yellow. I measured how wide the actual glass window was. I knew I wanted to feature 4 colors: purple, blue, peach, and yellow. I marked out these margins on the outside of the glass using a ruler and dry white whiteboard marker so I can see where I needed to paint, but I could also wipe off later. Started with blue because they were my favorite colored glasses. Initially I only used the pigmented paint, but it laid on a little thick. You couldn't see through the glass to the picture. I tried rescuing it by taking off the excess paint with the brush, but it was still a little too opaque for my liking. So I used biodegradable wipes to take into account the environment and sustainability, to take off the paint and start again. I should also mention the glass paints are washable, so in the future if I wanted to reuse the frame I can wipe off the paint. I then tried mixing the paint with some water to thin it down, which worked better than before. So using the brush and vertical strokes, I painted that on. Next I moved on to the yellow. When I moved on to the yellow, this was when I realized I should have done the yellow first. I had to reclean my brushes to make sure all the blue was out of the brush, otherwise the blue and yellow would mix for green. Time I tried less pigment and more water, but then it turned out too watery. I also dipped my brush into water before adding the pigment rather than the other way round. I added more pigment until I got to the consistency I felt worked. I still used the brush to apply the paint, however I used horizontal strokes to finish the paint instead of leaving the vertical streak. I wanted to experiment with the different ways of applying the paint to see if there is an effect. I then had the idea to use makeup sponges, hoping to find a way to eliminate the streaks left by the brush hairs. I began by trying to mix the colors with the prism sponge, but it didn't mix very well, the paint and water just being soaked up into the sponge. I tested it on the paper. There was some overlap of color which looked perfect, but there was still a separation between red and yellow. I started the mixing process again by mixing the colors with the paint brush, then using the prism-shaped sponge to apply it. At first I used the dabbing method, which just left spots of intense color, but didn't really spread it around. So I moved back to the dragging method, which worked better. Lastly was purple. The color theory we learn in primary school is that red and blue make purple. While in this case it was technically true, the color was too dark and looked more burgundy, so I added some yellow in an attempt to brighten it, as I didn't have white. This worked, however it didn't look exactly how I wanted it. I decided to try it anyway using the rectangular sponge to apply it. The color looked different fully spread out and closer to what I wanted it to look like. Happy with my first trial and that it was dry, I placed it back in the frame and wiped off the whiteboard marker. Then placed the image behind the glass. When I put the image in the first time it flopped around in the frame as it's a deep box frame. I used the flat sponges to fill out the extra space. I got some more sponges to fill out the important places. This is the final result from this experiment. I like how it turned out. The colors match the Photoshop version quite well, but the glass gives another dimension to the image. The application method I think worked best was the sponge on the peach or the purple. I like the effect the color has on the image and our interpretation of the scene. In comparison, the glass painting to the Photoshop version, I think the glass paint is better. It's a different form of mixed media that I haven't tried before. It also portrays the meaning better. The audience gets to look through the colored glass like they were looking at the image through my tinted glasses. Although the Photoshop version was a good experiment to test the process and the colors, I would like to experiment further with the glass painting method for colored lenses.